All right, guys, let's talk about profitability. Actually, in the previous video, I've already talked about the profitability of one of our stores in quite a bit of detail. To quickly recap, we actually went into the breakdown of how profitable this store is. We looked at all kinds of margins. I showed you the tool that we use to track the profitability of our stores, with this store being the example, pretty much on a daily basis and even intra-daily because it updates pretty much every 15 minutes. And all the settings, all the pros and cons of this app compared to some of the other apps, and also the reports that we create daily, which I think you can find here, where I essentially went through our breakdown and kind of talked around different margins, obviously gross margins, contribution margins, and net profit margins, the main costs associated with running a Shopify store around in the size range. And in this case, I really zoomed into 1 week because we do our reports on a weekly basis. And essentially also started talking about how to improve the profitability, different expectations for Shopify stores in this size range, and quite a few other things around that. In this video, I actually want to build on that and talk about some of the benchmarks and expectations of what a profitable Shopify store should look like, and also touch on other KPIs. What I found interesting with Lifetimely is that here you actually have a benchmark section. And again, Lifetimely being a pretty popular app for Shopify stores to track their profitability, what they do is they anonymously gather metrics of similar stores in your niche, right? And here the category is home and kitchen, home decor. That's not, it's like a pretty vague category, but this product kind of fits into it, although not really. But the point is that it compares it to stores in that similar niche. In any case, it compares it to other Shopify stores that are approximately in the size range. And what you see, it actually ranks you on a distribution, which I thought was pretty interesting. And I want to quickly go through some of the main KPIs to give you an actual data-driven analysis of what you can expect, of what's realistic, of what other stores are doing, and literally use a app that gathers and presents this data across dozens and dozens of stores in this case. And again, you can play around. It's also something for you to play around potentially, and maybe other apps have this as well, where you can essentially put in your category, put in your business model or whatnot, and see what results they give you. And also, this isn't quite accurate. So this store actually, it's not a dropshipping store, but in any case, those are things we can change here, and it will adjust, I'm guessing, to some extent. So you can see the general performance is relatively good. We're above average, although we're not in the top. We're not standard deviations out. And in terms of size, so this store isn't the biggest store we have, but already making 230K in sales. I think this is on a monthly basis. We are we're already in the top 25 percentile. Where the store really suffers, and I completely agree, I think this is something that we've been working really hard to improve with the store, is the contribution margin and the gross margin. They're definitely right on the cusp of being on the 25th percentile, on the lowest 25th percentile. We do kind of the settings we have here in the cost. So in the previous video, I went through some of the settings that you put in to actually tell Lifetimely what your COGS are, in case you don't already have them on Shopify, right? If you have the COGS setting in your Shopify order page, then Lifetimely will immediately pull that. If not, then you can give it additional information to override that. And we do that, and we actually we try to be as prudent as possible, where we actually overestimate our costs and always add more costs in terms of just in case for any unforeseen costs, shipping or fulfillment. We always round up. So in reality, this would be a bit better, but still definitely I think something to improve on. And again, for you to also understand that according to this distribution, right, that this app is gathering, the average contribution margin is 21%, which is essentially the margin you make really from the pure operations of the store, like after marketing and product costs. But before, let's say, your more overhead costs of the store, like paying for the subscriptions, paying for apps, paying for any other tech tools, paying for freelancers that you have on the side working on, for example, improving your themes, all of that is excluded. The net profit would include that, according to me. That's how we calculate it. Of course, there's different ways for you to calculate different profit margins. And the gross margin of 59% is already average. If you're above 75%, so you do a kind of a 4x from, COGS times 4x is your selling price or your average order value, then you're already in the top 75%. I think that makes a lot of sense. A lot of people, I think, rule of thumb that I hear is 3x, right? So people try to be in this above 66% margin, which essentially puts you, very nicely in this kind of third, essentially into that third quartile of top performing stores, which we're unfortunately not there yet. Where the store does really well, and I'll compare it to a second store because I think it's pretty interesting how those two compare, is our average order value, and our repeat average order value is very high, according to the averages, right? With 180 and 108, we're talking about, we're comfortably in the top 25%, even I think, pushing already like the top maybe 15-10% of top performers. Similarly, our retention, which I'm, to be honest, pretty surprised, because I think our retention, at least for those 90 days and 180 days, is pretty low, and we've definitely had better retention back in the day. And again, it just also depends on the store, but nonetheless, even with those retention figures, again, this is definitely not a subscription product. We're close to that kind of being in the last quartile pretty much everywhere. And again, also figures for you to aim for, and I think figures that are realistic. And finally, also our ROAS. Here we're pretty much smack in the middle, slightly above average, with a 2.5 ROAS, which again isn't anything crazy. The CAC is low, but to be honest, a CAC of 78 is high, but it is possible to do that because we have a AOV of 184, right, giving us a 2.5 ROAS. So I think this is a bit not adjusted to that, although of course, regardless of your average order value, you should be aiming for a lower CAC. And again, of course, being below 28 in this case would be also a very strong goal to have. It's just, I think you always need to put this into proportion with the average order value, obviously, that your store is achieving. If you're making, I'm sure most stores, right, it'll be interesting to kind of see the more detailed breakdown here, are making, a cost of acquisition of $20. They're usually selling their product for 60, 70, 80, right? Not more. I think if you manage to be, have a cost of acquisition below 25, but still achieve a average order value of 180, like we do, right, then your ROAS would be definitely in like the top 10%, right, or even more. And again, marketing percent of net sales, this is kind of a derivative of the blended ROAS. Here we're also a little bit above the average. So that's the quick overview of what they provide. I think this is pretty interesting. I opened up another store, which we're also in the above average section. However, here, why that's the case is a bit different. Here, actually, well, in some ways it's very similar, but what I think, and the currency here is completely off. So you can ignore the currency. Obviously, the percentages still make sense. Here, the contribution margin and the gross margin are just horrendous. Well, the contribution margin is actually not, it's not that bad. As in, it's funny that there's actually a negative. So like the lower 25% already started a negative contribution margin, which isn't great. But with the gross margin, we really are extremely low, which is something we're also aiming to improve. Again, why literally being at, we're like in the lowest 1%, I think, of gross margin, which is pretty incredible. And to be honest, I would need to check that figure. That actually looks even too low for what, from what I know, at least. In any case, I think that on the average order value, we're doing very strong. On the repeat customer rate, we're doing extremely strong, right? Repeat customer rate, 180 days, we're at 54%. That puts us in the top probably 2-3% of all stores in this category, which is definitely the strong point of the store. And in previous videos, I actually talked also about the store, especially in terms of repeat rate and other KPIs like average order value, which again is, I think, in contrast to the previous store, an interesting example, because even though, here we're also doing well with 17.8, this is still a huge difference from 54.5. And you can see that obviously once you get some standard deviations out from the average, right, it gets harder and harder. You need to really have a much higher score to really be pushing in those last percentages, because obviously there you're already competing with the best stores in that category. And then finally, with the ROAS, we're also in the top few percent, which is actually what explains our contribution margin still being, not negative, even though we have the lowest gross margin apparently in this distribution, which is pretty funny. we still have a contribution margin that's positive because we're able to make a 14 ROAS essentially on average for the store, right? So it's a store that really works off organic, and you can see that this will essentially create a very different income statement that we have for this store versus the first store, right? For the first store, it's very marketing heavy, at least it was back then, and the examples that I'm using here, right? For this week in June, you can see, to generate 75,000 in revenue for that week, we actually spent 24,000 in marketing, right? Just a very classic split between Google and Facebook, which results in essentially us taking home something like a 10% profit margin, right? And again, in the previous video, I talked about how even for this store, this margin fluctuates. Sometimes it's higher, sometimes it's lower. And here we were definitely pushing our marketing spend quite aggressively in that week, resulting actually in a lower profit margin because we were already, kind of showing our ad to less relevant people, where in absolute terms we could still increase our revenue, but in terms of profitability and ROAS, we were definitely kind of hitting those diminishing returns. In any case, hopefully you found this interesting to compare some of the KPIs. This will give you a better idea of, I think, where you will rank with certain KPIs, and if you see a certain KPIs, what you should aim for, what your targets are, what is realistic, what's not realistic. So hopefully that was helpful, and see you in the next video. Hey, before you bounce, consider subscribing to our channel, but only if you've actually enjoyed the video and found at least a few valuable things for your Shopify store. Also, check out our free Shopify app, Trackidex. We have a link in the description below. We're developing new features literally every day, and we're also excited to actually hear your feedback on some of the next features we should develop. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next video.